4 days before my grandson's baptism, the invitation arrived without my name. When I called, my son laughed softly and said, "There is no place for you." "Mom?" I went anyway, not to beg, but to stare straight at the truth. That night, I opened a dusty file I thought was buried forever. They assumed a 58-year-old widow would just fade away. They were dead wrong. My name is Marjorie Caldwell. I am 58 years old, and for 30 years, I served as the head of compliance for Grayford and Marlow Logistics. My entire career was built on the ability to spot the discrepancy, the tiny fracture in the foundation that everyone else ignored. I lived my life by rules, regulations, and the absolute certainty that if you looked hard enough, the truth would always present itself on a piece of paper. I live alone now in a quiet 2-story house in the suburbs of Lakewood, Colorado, surrounded by neighbors who wave but do not linger. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the silence of my kitchen was broken by the vibration of my phone. It was a text from my son, Ethan. It was short, vague, and entirely lacking in the details a grandmother would expect. He mentioned the baby's baptism was happening this coming Sunday, but he provided no time and no address. I assumed it was an oversight. I assumed the formal invitation was in the mail, delayed by the postal service. When the mail arrived an hour later, the envelope was there. It was thick, cream-colored cardstock, the kind that costs $3 a unit. I slit it open with a paring knife. Inside, the calligraphy was elegant, swirling black ink announcing the baptism of Lila Caldwell. I scanned the lines, looking for my name. I expected to see grandmother or a special note. There was nothing. The envelope was addressed simply to the Caldwell family. I picked up the phone. I did not panic. I dialed Ethan's number. He answered on the 3rd ring, his voice distracted, the sound of traffic in the background. "Hey, Mom." "I got the invitation," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I noticed there isn't a seat assignment for the reception, and I wasn't sure what time I should arrive at the church to help set up." There was a pause on the line. It was a heavy, deliberate silence. "Look, Mom," Ethan said, and I could hear him sighing, a sound of exaggerated exhaustion. "It is a small church. The pews are going to be packed tight. Honestly, there is no place for you. Mom, why bother coming all the way down just to stand in the back? It is going to be hot and crowded." My hand tightened around the phone. "No place for me." "It is just easier this way," he said, his tone shifting from dismissive to cold. "You know how you make things intense. We want a happy day." He hung up before I could respond. I stared at the screen, the call duration reading 1 minute and 12 seconds. Before I could process the rejection, a text message popped up from my daughter-in-law. "Brianna? Ethan told me you called. Don't cause a scene or pressure us. You always make everything so heavy. Just let us have this one day without your drama." I stood in the center of my kitchen. The afternoon sun was streaming across the granite island. I was holding a blue dish towel in my left hand, and I realized I was gripping it so hard my fingers were numb. "No place for you." The phrase repeated in my mind, rhythmic and hollow, like the tolling of a church bell. I had paid for that wedding. I had paid for Ethan's college tuition. I had sat in this very kitchen and held him when his father died. And now, I was a liability. I was heavy. I could have called back. I could have demanded respect. But something in me, the part of me that had spent 3 decades auditing liars, went quiet. I typed a reply to Brianna. "Okay, I understand. I set the phone down. The house was terrifyingly quiet. That night, I could not sleep. The word heavy kept clawing at my chest. I walked into the study, a room I rarely used since my husband, Frank, passed away 4 years ago. The air smelled of stale paper and lemon polish. In the corner stood the old metal filing cabinet. It was where we kept the deeds, the birth certificates, the life insurance policies. I had not opened the bottom drawer since the funeral. I knelt on the carpet and pulled the handle. The metal tracks screeched, a harsh sound in the empty house. I began to flip through the hanging folders, my fingers dusting off the tops of the tabs. Taxes, medical records, and then, near the back, a folder I had forgotten about. It was labelled in Frank's handwriting, Future Fund Ethan. I pulled it out. It felt thicker than I remembered. I sat back on my heels and opened it, expecting to see old savings bonds or university receipts. Instead, a small, white envelope slid out from between the bank statements. It was unsealed. I opened it and slid out the single sheet of paper inside. It was a photocopy. My eyes scanned the header. General Durable Power of Attorney. It was a legal document granting full financial authority over my assets to Ethan Caldwell in the event of my incapacitation. My breath caught in my throat. I skipped to the bottom of the page. There, on the signature line, was my name. Marjorie Caldwell. It was signed in blue ink. It looked like my signature. The slant of the M was correct. The loop of the C was familiar. But I stared at the date next to it. October 14th of last year. On October 14th, I was in Chicago attending a mandatory compliance recertification for the logistics firm. I was 1,000 miles away from this house. I was nowhere near a notary public. I had never signed this document. The shock that had paralyzed me earlier in the kitchen evaporated, replaced instantly by a cold, sharp clarity. They did not just want to exclude me from a party. They were not just being rude. I looked at the fake signature again. This was not family drama. This was fraud. "You think I am heavy," I whispered to the empty room, my voice flat and dangerous. "You have absolutely no idea?" I sat there on the dull beige carpet with the document in my lap, and for a moment the room spun. My mind did not go to the anger immediately. Instead, it went to the ledger. That is how my brain works. I replay the transactions. I audit the history. Frank and I bought this house in 1988. We scraped together a 20% down payment by skipping vacations and driving a used Ford sedan until the floorboards rusted through. I worked in compliance for 30 years. I taught my son that integrity was the only currency that mattered. At the dinner table, Frank used to tell Ethan, "A promise is good, son, but a contract is proof. Always get it in writing." Ethan would nod, his eyes wide and serious, absorbing the lesson. Or so we thought. When Frank died of a massive heart attack 4 years ago, the world bottomed out. I remember standing in the sterile hallway of the hospital, the fluorescent lights humming overhead. Ethan grabbed my shoulders. He looked so much like his father then. He looked me in the eye and said, "I am going to step up. Mom, you do not have to worry about a single thing. I am the man of the house now." I believed him. God help me. I believed him. That memory now tastes like ash in my mouth. The financial bleeding started slowly. First, it was the wedding. Ethan met Brianna 6 months after the funeral. She wanted a fairy tale. She wanted a venue that cost $10,000 just to unlock the doors. Because Ethan was my only child, and because I was drowning in grief and wanted to see life continue. I opened the checkbook. The wedding cost me nearly $60,000. I told myself it was an investment in his happiness. Then came the ambition. 2 years ago, Ethan came to me with a business plan for a company called Caldwell Renew. It was a sustainable packaging logistics firm. He needed capital. He showed me charts and projections to help him. I sold the 40-acre plot of land in Wyoming that Frank had inherited from his grandfather. It was our safety net. But I liquidated it. I wired $75,000 directly to Ethan's business account. I remember sitting at the kitchen table the day I made the transfer. I had printed out a simple promissory note, just a standard loan agreement to keep things clean for the IRS. I slid it across the table to him. Ethan looked at the paper and then looked at me with a wounded expression. He pushed the paper back. "Mom," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Do you not trust me? I am your son. This feels cold." I hesitated. I looked at his hurt face, and the mother in me overruled the compliance officer. I tore up the note. "Of course I trust you," I said. That was the first time I let emotion redact the rules. After their daughter, Lila, was born, the dynamic shifted again. I became the default help. I was the free daycare. I was the shuttle service. But whenever I tried to offer advice or ask about how the business was doing, the wall came up. Brianna was the architect of that wall. She did not use insults. She used therapy words. If I asked why they were buying a new luxury SUV when the business was still in its infancy, Brianna would smile tightly. "Marjorie, you are overstepping. We need to set some healthy boundaries here." If I expressed hurt that they forgot my birthday, I was being toxic. If I wanted to see my granddaughter on a weekend they had planned for themselves, I was not respecting their emotional space. They weaponized the language of mental health to silence me. They made me feel small, outdated, and intrusive in my own family. I looked down at the forged power of attorney in my hands. The paper shook slightly. This was not about boundaries. This was about erasure. I turned the page. Attached to the fake power of attorney was a secondary form. It was a request to transfer the custodianship of a 529 education savings plan. My heart hammered against my ribs. I had opened that account the day Lila was born. I had put $15,000 of my own retirement money into it to ensure my granddaughter would not drown in student debt like her parents. I was the sole custodian. The document in my hand was a request to remove me as the custodian and appoint Ethan Caldwell in my place, citing my declining mental faculties as the reason. I felt a coldness spread from my chest to my fingertips. They were not just stealing from me. They were stealing from her. And they were using my incompetence as the key to the vault. I did not storm over to Ethan's house. I did not scream into the phone. That is what an amateur does. That is what a hysterical mother does. I am a compliance officer. I sat at my dining room table, pushed the emotions into a steel box in the back of my mind, and pulled out a yellow legal pad. I made columns. Who, when, what, where. The ink flowed onto the page as I constructed the framework of an investigation. I drove to the bank at 9 a.m. I walked to the counter with my shoulders square. The teller was a young woman with bright pink nails who looked at me with a soft, condescending smile when I asked for a full audit of all transfers over $500 for the last 24 months. "Mrs. Caldwell," she said. leaning forward and lowering her voice. Sometimes the online banking can be confusing for older customers. If you forgot a purchase, we can just print a summary. I looked at her name tag. I do not need pity. Jessica, I need data. Print the full transaction history, including IP addresses for the authorization logins. Her smile vanished. She printed the stack. 30 minutes later, I was sitting in a booth at a diner on the edge of town, across from Leona Price. Leona and I went to university together. She had been a notary public for 40 years. She did not ask why I needed her to look at a photocopy of a power of attorney. She just put on her reading glasses and pulled a red pen from her purse. "The font is wrong," Leona said immediately, tapping the header. "This is Times New Roman. The standard state form was updated 2 years ago to use Arial for the header block. Most people do not notice. I notice." "Look at the date," I said, pointing to the signature line. "October 14th. Leona looked up at me. "October 14th. Marjorie, that was the day of your cousin Sarah's funeral in Wyoming?" I nodded. I pulled out my phone and opened the photo gallery. I scrolled back. There I was, standing in a graveyard in Cheyenne, wearing black, with a timestamp of 11:30 in the morning. I swiped to the next image. It was a receipt from a gas station on I-25 300 miles away from where this document was allegedly signed. "I have the turnpike receipts too," I said. "I was physically incapable of signing this document in Colorado." Leona narrowed her eyes at the notary stamp on the paper. "Thomas J. Miller?" She read. She pulled out her smartphone and navigated to the Secretary of State's website. She typed in the name. A moment later, she let out a dry, humorless laugh. "His commission expired 6 months before this date," Leona said. "He is not even a valid notary. This isn't just a lie. Marjorie, it is a clumsy forgery." I felt a cold vindication settle in my stomach. They were sloppy. They were arrogant. They thought I was too old to check. I went back to the stack of bank statements Leona and I had spread out on the greasy table. I traced my finger down the list of withdrawals. Most were small, groceries, utilities. And then, my finger stopped on a line from 3 weeks ago. It was a transfer of $12,000. The recipient was listed as North Ridge Faith Center. I stared at the name. That was the church where the baptism was being held. I had never donated to them. I attended a small Methodist chapel on the other side of town. $12,000, I whispered. "What is it?" Leona asked. "They took $12,000 from my savings," I said, my voice shaking with a rage I could no longer suppress. "And they sent it to the church that I am not allowed to enter." I realized then exactly what I was looking at. I was not just an unwanted guest. I was the financier. North Ridge Faith Center was not just a church. It was a campus. The building was a sprawling structure of glass and white stone, designed to look more like a corporate headquarters than a house of worship. I arrived at 2 in the afternoon on a Wednesday, a time when the halls would be empty and the administrative staff would be bored. I wore my best charcoal suit, the one I used to wear for federal audits. I did not come to pray. I came to inspect. I walked into the administrative wing, the click of my heels echoing on the polished marble floors. A young woman with a headset sat behind a reception desk that looked like it belonged in a 5-star hotel. I introduced myself as a donor with a query regarding a recent transaction. She directed me down the hall to the office of the financial administrator. As I walked, I stopped. To my right, Mounted on the wall under a spotlight was a large plaque titled Builders of Faith, This Year's Patrons. It was categorized by donation tiers. My eyes scanned the lists: silver, gold, and there, under platinum family sponsors, were the names Ethan and Brianna Caldwell. I felt a bile rise in my throat. They had bought their way into the inner circle of this congregation, and they had done it with my retirement savings. I knocked on the office door. The administrator was a middle-aged woman named Mrs. Higgins, with kindly eyes and a desk cluttered with pamphlets. She welcomed me in, looking slightly confused. "I am Marjorie Caldwell," I said, sitting down and folding my hands on my lap. "I believe a donation of $12,000 was made recently under my name. Or perhaps under my son's name. Ethan?" Mrs. Higgins brightened. "Oh, yes, the baptism gift. It was such a generous offering." Mrs. Caldwell, truly. It covered the new audio system for the nursery wing. She typed a few keys on her computer. "Here it is. $12,000. It is listed as a gift from you, processed via electronic transfer." "I see," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "And was there a note attached?" "Yes." She read from the screen. It says, "Gift for the baptism of Lila, per son's request." It was submitted through our online portal. "Who filled out the submission form?" I asked. Mrs. Higgins paused, looking at the logs. "Well, the user account is linked to your name, but... Oh, there is a note here in the internal comments. Your daughter-in-law, Brianna, called to verify the transfer went through. She mentioned that you were very busy with travel, so she was handling the administrative side for you." "She is very helpful," I said. The sarcasm was so slight, it was invisible. "Mrs. Higgins, for my tax records. Could you print out that transaction receipt? Specifically the part showing the source account and the IP address of the sender if you have it. I need to reconcile my books." "Of course." 10 minutes later, I walked out to the parking lot with the evidence in my purse. The sun was glaring off the windshields. My phone rang. It was Ethan. I stared at the screen for a moment before answering. "Hello, Ethan?" "Hey, Mom," he said. His voice was casual, breezy, as if he hadn't stolen a car's worth of money from me. "I just wanted to remind you about Sunday. Look, I know you might be thinking about popping in, but really, do not. The church is going to be packed. Standing room only. You will just be uncomfortable." He paused, waiting for me to argue. He wanted me to beg. He wanted me to be the needy mother, so he could be the long-suffering son. "I understand," I said. "And," he added, his voice dropping a little, "Brianna is really stressed. She wants everything perfect for Lila. If you come, it is going to shift the energy. You know, you will just make everyone awkward." I looked back at the massive white building. I thought about the platinum sponsor plaque. I thought about the $12,000. "Do not worry, Ethan," I said. "I will not make anyone awkward." "Great," he said, relieved. "Thanks for understanding. Mom, we will send you pictures." I hung up. I will not make anyone awkward, I thought, because I will not be there to make a scene. I will be with my lawyer making a case. I got into my car and started the engine. Before I could shift into reverse, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from a number I did not recognize. I opened it. Mrs. Caldwell. "This is Mrs. Higgins from the office." I probably should not say this, but you seemed like such a decent woman today. After you left, I saw a flag on your file. Someone sent an email to the senior pastor yesterday warning us that you are mentally unstable and might cause a disturbance if you showed up on Sunday. They asked security to keep an eye out for you. I thought you should know. I stared at the text. My hands gripped the steering wheel. They had not just stolen my money. They had poisoned my name. They had painted me as a threat to my own grandchild to cover their theft. I put the car in gear. The sadness was gone. All that was left was the cold, hard drive to destroy them. I sat in my car in the church parking lot and replied to Mrs. Higgins asking for a copy of the communication. A moment later, an image appeared on my screen. It was a screenshot of the email sent to the pastor. The sender address was Brianna Events, a side account my daughter-in-law used for planning parties. But the body of the text was written in the first person, and the sign-off at the bottom was just two initials, E.C. Ethan. I read the words my son had written about me. My mother has been struggling with paranoia lately. She confuses reality with her own inventions. We are worried that her presence might frighten the other children or disrupt the sanctity of the service. My hand did not shake. I felt a strange, icy calm settle over my skin. They had not just stolen my money. They had stolen my sanity. They were building a legal case for incompetence against me, brick by brick, lie by lie, so that when they eventually moved to take control of everything I owned, the community would nod and say it was for the best. They had turned me into a danger to my own grandchild. I lowered the phone. If I stormed into that church on Sunday, if I screamed and cried and demanded justice, I would only prove them right. I would be the crazy grandmother they warned everyone about. No, I said aloud to the empty car. I will not give you a scene. I will give you a summons. I drove straight to the Denver Tech Center. The office of Miles Hart was tucked away in a glass building that smelled of coffee and commercial carpet cleaner. Miles was a man in his 40s with sharp eyes and a desk that was obsessively organized. He was a specialist in civil disputes and document fraud. I had vetted him years ago for a corporate contract, and I knew he was expensive, ruthless, and precise. I laid the folder on his desk. The forged power of attorney. The bank statements showing the $12,000 transfer. The affidavit from the notary public stating his commission had expired. Miles flipped through the pages in silence. The only sound in the room was the rhythmic ticking of a clock on the wall. Finally, he looked up. "This is not a grey area, Marjorie," Miles said, leaning back. "This is fraud. The power of attorney is void on its face due to the expired notary commission, but the intent to use it to access funds constitutes criminal behavior. And this donation, this is conversion of assets." I pulled out my phone and placed it on the desk. "I have more. Look at these text messages." I scrolled back to conversations from 2 years ago. Dozens of messages from Ethan. "Mom, can you wire the money for the venue? I am swamped. I will sign the loan papers next week. Mom, transfer the cash for the car down payment. I promise we will notarize the agreement on Friday." "He never signed the papers," I said. "He relied on the fact that I was his mother. He knew I would not press him because I did not want to ruin the relationship. But these texts prove the money was never a gift. It was conditional." Miles nodded slowly. "It establishes a pattern of manipulation. We can use this." He steepled his fingers. "Here is the strategy. We do not start with a lawsuit. That takes too long. We start with a demand letter. We give them 72 hours to return the funds and resign from the executorship of the education fund. If they refuse, we file for an emergency injunction to freeze their assets. Do it, I said. Miles turned to his computer to begin drafting. He typed for a moment, accessing a public property database to verify Ethan's assets. Suddenly, he stopped. He frowned and leaned closer to the screen. "Marjorie," Miles said, his voice changing pitch. "You said Ethan's business was struggling, that he needed your help to stay afloat." "Yes," I replied. "He said they were barely making payroll." "That is interesting," Miles said, "because I am looking at a property record here. 8 months ago, an entity called Juniper Hollow Holdings purchased a 4-bedroom vacation rental in Vale. It was a cash purchase. No mortgage." "I have never heard of that company," I said. Miles clicked the mouse. "I am pulling the articles of incorporation now. Juniper Hollow Holdings. The registered agents are Ethan Caldwell and Brianna Caldwell. 50-50 ownership." I felt the air leave the room. 8 months ago. That was right around the time I told them I could not afford to pay for their trip to Europe. They had told me they were broke. They had cried at my kitchen table. And all the while, they were sitting on a hidden company with a luxury property paid for in cash. They did not just steal from me because they were desperate, I whispered, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. They stole from me because they felt entitled to keep their own money while spending mine. Miles looked at me, his expression grim. "We are going to need a bigger demand letter." I picked up my phone and typed the message that would buy me the element of surprise. "I will stay home. I wish Lila peace." I hit send. It was the surrender they wanted, the white flag that signaled I had accepted my place in the shadows. To Ethan and Brianna, silence meant submission. To me, silence was simply the time required to reload. While they were likely celebrating their victory over the difficult mother-in-law, I was driving to a small bakery on 4th Street to meet Tessa Wainwright. Tessa was Lila's godmother and Brianna's best friend since college. But she was also a girl I had comforted when her own mother passed away 5 years ago. I knew she had a conscience, and I needed to see how heavy it was. Tessa looked nervous. She kept tearing small pieces off her paper napkin. I did not pressure her. I simply ordered tea and asked about her job. After 10 minutes, the guilt won. "Marjorie," Tessa said, her voice dropping so low I had to lean in. "I shouldn't be telling you this. Brianna would kill me. But something happened at wine night last week. It just didn't sit right with me." "Tell me," I said gently. "Brianna was talking about the business loans," Tessa said, looking down at her lap. She was laughing. "She told the group that she finally got you to sign the papers to secure their new credit line. She said, it is amazing what you can get old people to sign if you just put it in front of them while they are cooking dinner. They don't even read it." I felt a sharp sting, but I did not flinch. "I see." "She called it the senility discount," Tessa whispered, tears forming in her eyes. "I am so sorry, Marjorie. I know you are sharp. I know you are not what she says." I reached across the table and patted her hand. "Thank you, Tessa. Would you be willing to send me a text message confirming that conversation, just for my own peace of mind?" She nodded. 5 minutes after I left, the text arrived. I took a screenshot and added it to my digital file. Back at home, I opened my laptop and pulled up the public event page for the baptism. I had found it earlier. They had been foolish enough to leave the guest list visible on the church's community calendar. I analysed the names. It was not a gathering of family and friends. It was a roster of utility. There was the vice president of the local commercial bank. There was a prominent real estate developer. There was a venture capitalist from Denver. These were not people who cared about the spiritual salvation of an infant. They were potential investors for Juniper Hollow Holdings. The realization clicked into place like a deadbolt. They did not exclude me just because I was heavy. They excluded me because I was the only person in the room who knew their financial success was built on theft. If I was there, I was a risk. If I was absent, I was erased. And they could play the role of the pious, successful young couple perfectly. This was not a sacrament. It was a public relations campaign. I went to my desk and opened a fresh grey file folder. I began to assemble the narrative. First, the bank statement showing the unauthorized transfer. Second, the forged power of attorney. Third, the screenshot of the state notary database showing the expired commission. Fourth, the email from E.C. claiming I was mentally unstable. Fifth, the corporate registration for Juniper Hollow Holdings showing their hidden assets. I closed the folder. It was thin, but it was heavy with consequence. My phone rang. The screen displayed a number I recognized from my visit to the administrative office earlier. It was the main line for Northridge Faith Center. I answered. "This is Marjorie." "Mrs. Caldwell." The voice was deep and hesitant. "This is Pastor Gideon Rowe. I apologize for calling you so late." "Is something wrong, Pastor?" I asked. "I am afraid so," he said. "I have been reviewing the donation logs for the upcoming ceremony, specifically the endowment or rather, the endowment that was made in your name. There is a discrepancy in the origin of the funds that I find deeply troubling. I know you are not planning to attend the service, but could you come to my office tomorrow, privately?" I looked at the grey folder on my desk. "I will be there, Pastor," I said. "I think we have a lot to discuss." Pastor Gideon Rowe's office smelled of old books and floor wax. It was a serious room for serious conversations. But as I sat across from him, I could see that the pastor was the one who was uncomfortable. He kept adjusting the cuffs of his shirt. I sat perfectly still with my hands folded on my lap. I did not come here to weep. I came here to correct the record. "Mrs. Caldwell," he began, his voice low and practiced. "This is difficult. Your son and his wife met with me on Tuesday. They were quite adamant about the seating arrangements." "I imagine they were," I said. He sighed and looked at a seating chart spread out on his desk. They requested a reserved section, front row. They called it the Platinum Donor Circle. They also specifically requested that security be alerted to prevent you from entering the sanctuary. They cited safety concerns. I felt the anger ripple through me, but I forced it down into the cold, hard place where I kept my logic. "Pastor, look at me. Do I look like a safety concern to you?" He looked at me. He saw a woman in a tailored blazer, calm, collected, and utterly sane. He shook his head slowly. "No, you do not." "I am not here to make a scene," I said, my voice steady. "I am not here to ruin the baptism of my grandchild. That day belongs to Lila. But I will not allow my name to be used to buy prestige in this church while my character is assassinated in your back office." I pointed to the donation records on his screen. That $12,000 did not come from a willing donor, I said. It came from a grandmother who was unaware her life savings were being siphoned off to purchase a front row seat she is not allowed to sit in. Pastor Rowe stopped moving. He looked at the screen, then back at me. The silence stretched out, heavy and suffocating. If the truth has no place in this building, I asked him, holding his gaze, then tell me, Pastor, is this a holy ritual, or is it just a performance? He flinched. The question landed exactly where I intended. He closed the folder on his desk. It will be corrected, he said, his tone shifting from bureaucratic to solemn. We will verify the source of the funds immediately. And I will personally ensure that the note regarding your mental stability is stricken from our parish records. It does not reflect the reality I see before me. Thank you, I said. I will not be there on Sunday. I will send my gift to Lila when she is old enough to understand it. I will not be a prop in their show. I left the church with my dignity intact. I went home and spent the rest of the day gardening, pulling weeds with a methodical precision that cleared my mind. Saturday night arrived. The house was quiet. Tomorrow was the big day. At 8 in the evening. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. I picked it up. It was a text from Ethan. Hey, Mom. Really sorry to ask, but last-minute expenses came up for the reception catering. Can you transfer another $3,500? I will pay you back next week when the business checks clear. Love you. I stared at the screen. The audacity was breathtaking. After banning me, after labeling me insane, after stealing $12,000, he still thought he could dip his bucket into the well one last time. He thought I was still the same mother who would set herself on fire to keep him warm. I typed my reply. I did not use emojis. I did not use pleasantries. Submit your request through my lawyer. I hit send. I placed the phone back on the table and took a sip of my tea. The clock ticked on the wall. 1 minute. 2 minutes. 15 minutes later, the phone did not just buzz. It rang. It was Brianna. I answered, putting the phone to my ear without saying a word. Marjorie. Her voice was high, shrill, and trembling. What did you say to the church? They just called us. They are asking questions about the donation source. They said they are freezing the funds pending an investigation. I listened to her panic. It sounded like music. We need that money for the credit verification tomorrow, she screamed, her composure completely gone. You are ruining everything. I am not ruining anything. Brianna? I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. I am just auditing the books. The silence of my house was replaced by the relentless vibration of my phone against the mahogany coffee table. It buzzed and danced across the wood, a frantic rhythm that mirrored the panic unraveling inside my son's home. I did not pick it up. I simply sat in my armchair, watching the screen light up with name after name. Ethan. Brianna. Ethan again. Then came the headlights. They swept across my living room window, cutting through the darkness. A car door slammed. Heavy footsteps pounded up the walkway. Ethan did not ring the bell. He pounded on the wood with the flat of his hand. Mom! He called out. His voice was muffled by the oak door, but I could hear the desperate attempt to sound reasonable. Mom! Open up, please. You have this all wrong. We just want things to be okay. I walked to the door, but I did not unlock it. I rested my forehead against the cool wood. I could hear him breathing on the other side, just inches away. "Mum," he said, his voice dropping to a coaxing whisper. "Come on. Let's just talk. We can fix this." "If you need to speak," I said, my voice clear and loud enough to penetrate the barrier between us. "Speak to Miles' heart." "Mom, don't be like this," he pleaded. "It is just money. We can work it out." I turned the deadbolt to ensure it was fully engaged and walked back to the living room. His phone rang then. I could hear him answering it on the porch. It was Brianna. He put her on speaker. Or perhaps she was screaming loud enough for the microphone to catch it. "Is she letting you in?" Brianna shrieked. Then, her voice shifted, cracking into a sob that sounded performed for an audience. "Marjorie, please do it for Lila. Why are you doing this? You are hurting the family. You are making this so hard on everyone." I picked up my own phone and typed a single message to the group chat. "Do not use my grandchild as a shield." Then, I hit send on the email I had prepared with Miles earlier that afternoon. It was the formal demand letter. It appeared on their phones instantly. It was not a request. It was an ultimatum. It demanded an immediate acknowledgement of the debt, the nullification of the forged power of attorney, the return of the $12,000 unauthorized donation, and a signed repayment plan for the remaining stolen assets within 10 days. There was silence on the porch for a long moment as they read it. Then, Ethan kicked the door. The sound was like a gunshot. "You want to play legal games?" he shouted, the mask of the good son falling away completely. "Fine. You will never see Lila again. You hear me? You are cut off. You will never step foot in my house again." I stood by the window, watching his shadow on the porch. I typed my reply calmly. "If you do that, you are simply writing your own character into the court record." A moment later, a new notification pinged. It was not from them. It was a screenshot forwarded to me by Tessa. She had sent it to the group chat she shared with Brianna. "I am not going to lie for you. Brianna, if Marjorie's lawyer calls me, I will testify. This feels wrong." I heard Brianna screaming at Ethan through the phone outside. "You said you handled Tessa. You said she was loyal. This is your fault, Ethan. You and your stupid ideas." They were eating each other alive. I waited until I heard Ethan's car peel out of the driveway before I returned to my laptop. I had one more check to run. I logged into the county property records, refreshing the search on Juniper Hollow Holdings. My breath hitched. There was a pending transaction initiated 2 days ago. They were under contract to purchase a second vacation rental, a cabin near Breckenridge. They were not broke. They were not struggling. They were leveraging my life savings to build a real estate portfolio while I sat at home clipping coupons. My phone rang. It was Miles' Hart. "Marjorie," he said, his voice clipped and professional. "I just got off the phone with the clerk. Because of the evidence of active dissipation of assets, specifically that new property purchase attempt, we have grounds." "Grounds for what?" I asked. "An emergency injunction," Miles said. "If we file first thing Monday morning, the judge can freeze the accounts of Juniper Hollow Holdings by noon. They won't be able to move a single penny." "Monday," I whispered. "Yes," Miles said. "The day after the baptism." I looked at the clock. Sunday was coming. They would have their party. They would smile for the cameras. And on Monday, the ice would crack beneath their feet. Sunday morning arrived with a sky so blue it looked painted. I drove to the North Ridge Faith Center, but I did not park in the paved lot reserved for the congregation. Instead, I parked my sedan on the gravel service road 300 yards away, tucked behind a line of oak trees. I turned off the engine and rolled down the window just an inch. I could hear the faint sound of the organ drifting on the breeze. I watched them arrive. Men in navy suits and women in pastel dresses stepped out of luxury cars, holding hands and smiling. They looked like a commercial for the American dream. Then I saw Ethan's car. He got out first, looking handsome and proud, holding the carrier with Lila inside. Brianna followed, wearing a white dress that fluttered in the wind. They looked perfect. They looked prosperous. From this distance, you could not see the cracks in the foundation. You could not see the theft. I gripped the steering wheel. A younger version of me might have marched down there to claim my place. But I was not that woman anymore. I whispered to the empty car. Today belongs to Lila. Tomorrow belongs to the truth. I had already visited the church office 2 days prior to leave my gift. It was a small box containing a silver bracelet engraved with her name. Underneath it lay a sealed letter marked "For Lila" on her 18th birthday. I had written it with a steady hand. There was no venom in it, no mention of the war I was about to wage against her parents. It simply said that character is the only asset that cannot be stolen, and that kindness is a choice, not a weakness. It was the only inheritance I could guarantee she would receive. I waited until the heavy wooden doors of the church closed, sealing them inside their sanctuary. Then I put the car in gear and drove home. Later that afternoon, the digital performance began. I sat in my kitchen and refreshed my social media feed. There it was, a professional photograph of Ethan and Brianna standing at the altar, looking adoringly at the baby. The caption read, "Family is everything. So blessed to share this day with our community." I stared at the screen. The hypocrisy was so sharp, it almost drew blood. "Family is everything," he wrote, while his mother sat alone in a house he was trying to mortgage out from under her. But the facade was already crumbling behind the scenes. An hour later, I received a blind copy of an email from Pastor Rowe. He had sent it to Ethan and Brianna. It was polite, but devastating. It stated that due to unresolved discrepancies regarding the donor origin, the $12,000 platinum sponsorship had been frozen and would not be listed in the permanent parish registry until a full financial audit was completed. The humiliation must have been immediate. At 6 p.m, my phone lit up. It was Brianna. She did not call this time. She texted, "Marjorie, please, can we just talk just woman to woman, Ethan? He is spiraling. I am scared. We can fix this without lawyers." I looked at the message. She was trying to find a crack in my armor, trying to appeal to the grandmother in me because she knew the compliance officer was coming for her throat. I did not soften. I typed a single reply. "My attorney will accept your correspondence at 9 a.m. I set the phone aside and pulled the stack of documents toward me. Miles had messaged over the final drafts for the emergency injunction. I uncapped my pen. The house was silent, but the scratching of my pen on the paper sounded like thunder to my ears. I signed the affidavit declaring the power of attorney to be a forgery. I signed the request to freeze the assets of Juniper Hollow Holdings. I signed the motion to remove Ethan as the custodian of the education fund. I was just closing the file when my phone rang again. It was late, nearly 10 at night. The number was unfamiliar. I answered cautiously. "Hello, Mrs. Caldwell." The voice on the other end was male, hushed, and trembling. "You do not know me. My name is David. I used to handle the bookkeeping for your son's logistics startup before he let me go." "I am listening," I said, my hand instinctively reaching for a pen. "I heard through the grapevine about what is happening," he said, his voice dropping lower. "About the baptism, about the money, Mrs. Caldwell. I need to tell you something. They did not just do this to you." He paused, and I could hear him taking a shaky breath. "I have the old ledgers," he whispered. "I have the invoices they falsified to get the bank loans last year. I kept copies because I was scared they would pin it on me. It is a Ponzi scheme, Mrs. Caldwell, and I have the proof." I sat up straight, the darkness of the room suddenly feeling very small. "Bring them to me." Monday morning broke with the force of a judgment day. At 9 o'clock sharp, the district court judge signed the emergency injunction. The legal gears ground into motion, and the accounts of Juniper Hollow Holdings were frozen solid. At 10 o'clock, Miles Hart called me to confirm that the transaction for the new vacation cabin had failed. Ethan had stood there, pen in hand, ready to sign, only to be told by his broker that his assets were locked. The evidence provided by David, the former accountant, was the final nail in the coffin. The documents were a roadmap of greed. Ethan and Brianna had been funneling their lifestyle through the company. The lease on Brianna's luxury SUV, their trip to Cabo San Lucas, the catering for their parties. It was all listed as consulting fees or logistical overhead, funded by loans secured against my name using that forged power of attorney. Ethan called me at 11. He sounded breathless, like a man drowning. "Mom!" he gasped. "The accounts. I can't access anything." What do you want?" "I want the truth," I said, my voice cutting through the line like a razor. "And I want you to stop pretending to be moral with my money." The meeting took place at 2 in the afternoon at Miles Hart's office. There was no church choir here. There were no smiling guests. There was only a mahogany table and the hum of the air conditioner. Ethan and Brianna sat on one side, looking small and terrified. I sat on the other, with Miles beside me. Miles reached into his briefcase and pulled out the forged power of attorney. He placed it in the center of the table. It landed with a soft slap that sounded louder than a gunshot. "This is a felony," Miles said simply. "Forgery, fraud, elder abuse. We have the bank records. We have the notary's affidavit. We have the witness testimony from your former accountant." Brianna cracked instantly. She turned on Ethan. Her face twisted in panic. "You told me it was fine. You told me. You said she was just an old woman. You said, Mom never checks the paperwork. She won't dare sue us." Ethan sat in silence, staring at the table. His face was pale. He had been stripped of his pretenses. He was no longer the successful entrepreneur or the pious family man. He was just a thief who had underestimated his victim. "You have two choices," Miles continued, ignoring Brianna's outburst. "Option 1. We go to trial. We file criminal charges for the forgery and civil charges for the theft. Option 2. You admit to the forgery. You sign a confession. You agree to a repayment plan with interest, secured by a lien on your home, and you make a full retraction." Ethan looked up, his eyes wet. "Mum, please. I am your son. You can't send me to jail. I am Lila's father." I looked at him. I remembered the little boy I had walked to the bus stop. I remembered the teenager I had taught to drive. And I remembered the man who had laughed on the phone and told me there was no place for me. Being a mother does not mean being a foundation for immorality, I said. Do not use my love as a getaway car. I slid a second document across the table. This is not about the money, I said. This is about my name. You told the church I was unstable. You told the family I was dangerous. You used those lies to justify stealing from me. I tapped the paper. You will sign this letter. It is addressed to Pastor Rowe and the entire Caldwell extended family. It admits that you fabricated the stories about my mental health to cover up your financial misconduct. It admits that you excluded me from the baptism, not because I was heavy, but because you were afraid I would expose you. If I sign this, Ethan whispered, his voice trembling, everyone will know. Everyone already knows who I am because of your lies, I replied. Now, they will know who you are. Ethan picked up the pen. His hand shook so violently that the tip tapped against the paper. He signed. Then he looked at me. And for the first time in years, he was honest. I said there was no place for you. Ethan stammered, tears spilling over. Because I was terrified. I knew if you came, you would see through it. You always see the truth. Mom, I was scared you would see me for what I am. I stood up. I did not hug him. I did not comfort him. I took the signed confession and the repayment schedule. My place is not in your pew, Ethan, I said, turning toward the door. My place is in the truth. I walked out into the sunlight. The air was crisp. I was alone. But for the first time in a long time, I did not feel heavy. I felt light. Thanks for listening to my story, everyone. I'd love to know where you guys are tuning in from. So drop your city or country in the comments below. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this one, please make sure to subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this video get discovered by more people who need to hear it. Catch you in the next one.